Well, it's a real pleasure for me, Ted, to be with this group. And I note in particular John Blackador is present. John was around at the beginning of the foundation about the same time that I was, so he may have some comments as well. But briefly, to address your question of how and why the foundation got started, it came when Bishop Skeet began his bishopric here in New England. He came in 1988. And very shortly after he arrived, he noticed there were pockets of money all over New England. Some was in the Maine trustees' hands, some was in the New Hampshire trustees' hands, some was in the Southern New England Conference trustees' hands, some was in the Council of Finance Administration and New England Deaconess, and on and on and on. He gathered all those people around a common table about shortly after he arrived and began to see, well, maybe there's a better way for us to address and be good stewards of the resources that we've been granted. So he set up a commission that was headed by Herb Taylor's late father, Blaine Taylor, Methodist minister, and Blaine headed that commission, and I was asked to join that commission, which I did, and we with after a couple of years of study, we did have the proposal to the before the annual conference, and it was just over 30 years ago that the annual conference established formally the United Methodist Foundation of New England. That was in 1991. And at that time, it was like the creation of the universe. All was dark. There was no light. There was no money. There was no office. There was no staff. There was no foundational office. No foundational documents. There was no banking connections. No investments. There was no nothing. And I think God said, "Let there be light." Little by little, we began to address those voids and built the foundation. The foundation grew over the next 30 years or so. And I think of the way that happened was kind of like a child's development. The first 10 years were really the early childhood years of the foundation. And that was when I was chair of the foundation. We got the documents set up, the banking connections set up, all of those important connections. And we had significant help from the New England Deaconess Association, from Preachers Aid Society, and for a couple of years from the annual conference. But it very quickly became evident that we had to go our own way and to make our own money to support the foundation. More about that later, perhaps. But the first 10 years were really finding an office, getting an executive director, establishing the board of directors, getting the foundational documents. And I'll mention here that the University, that Arkansas Foundation was quite helpful to us in there. I had grown up in Little Rock. I knew James Argue, the late James Argue, who was executive director of the foundation in Arkansas for a long time, a child of a Methodist minister there in Little Rock. And he was very generous in sharing documents and advice on getting there. So they had started up in 1965. So they were one of the early United Methodist foundations across the land. He gave us a significant push. So the first 10 years were the establishment and kind of the childhood years. The next 10 years, that's when Dave Fitz took over as chair of the foundation, and Dave guided it through those teenage years, the turbulent teenage years, introducing some systematic office procedures and helping the foundation grow. And then the third 10 years, what you might think of the early 10 years, that was when John Regier basically he ran most of the foundation during most of those years and got it into ever more sophisticated kinds of contacts and building. So those first 30 years were like childhood and adult and teenage years, adult years, and that grew. And the way the foundation was funded, I think is important. One comment on that, and then I'll stop because that's essentially the answer to your question. But the way the foundation was funded, it became quite clear that the annual conference in New England was not going to have the ability to support the foundation with continuing grants. The same was true with both the Preachers Aid Society and the New England Deaconess Association, both of which were essential in the beginning, because each of them, I think, contributed $25,000 a year for a couple of years to give the foundations those early starts. But I'll always remember George Robbins, who had been vice president over at State Street Bank and was on the board, the initial board that I got appointed. He suggested that State Street Bank could manage what little monies we might have, and that they could do that for a very low rate using the passive index funds, and we could charge, the foundation could charge the churches and kind of the going rate for management of funds, which at that time was maybe 1% of the funds invested, they would charge each year. And the difference between that 1% that the churches were paying to the foundation and the amount that we were able to pay to State Street Bank, that was a significant difference. And it's those monies which then and now essentially support the foundation. So the great bulk of the fees that churches pay to have their funds managed goes is used by the foundation to support its staff, its outreach, its development. And I will close with this, Ted, by saying that the foundation was started with three purposes, and they remain intact to this day. The first of those purposes was to help United Methodists all across New England make gifts to their churches in the way they want to do it. The foundation was an even-handed broker who was not raising money for itself. It was simply helping United Methodists realize their philanthropic dreams in the way that seemed best to them. The second goal that the foundation has, and these were founding principles which remain intact, the second goal was really to manage those monies in a socially responsible way. And that, I think, is critical because Methodists believe in, with our social creed, it addresses everything from the very grandest schemes of the cosmos down to the very smallest schemes of daily life. We Methodists have those principles, social principles, as key amongst them. And Phil Susag on our early board was critical in holding our feet to those social principles. And then the third principle, after helping Methodists make their contributions to the church and then managing that money responsibly, the third was, to the extent that we were able, to make grants to help local people make grants to their churches, and grants where the amount of money that they have to give is a significant amount for the receiving agents. You know, a $3,000 grant or $2,000 or $5,000 that can be given through the foundation with these kinds of grants has been exceedingly important. So I'm very proud of the foundation and have the greatest regard for it, and very thankful that I had the health, the ability, and was selected by Blaine Taylor, Herb's father, to be the first chairman for 10 years.